Alright, hey guys, this is Burt from Soft Tubes, and today I am doing a film review for Dark Phoenix. Basically the most recent and what is going to be the last of the main tentpole X-Men films from Fox, 21st Century Fox or 20th Century Fox. I think it came under 20th, but either way, before they go under Disney. There's still New Mutants coming out from them, but that is actually basically a spin-off film. Not one of the major ones, and that's, going to be the last ever one that they made. Essentially, it's going to be that. But this is the last of the main ones. And before I get into the actual review itself, I'm going to do a little bit of a disclaimer on this one, just to sort of give a bit of context for where I'm coming at this film from. So, for me, the X-Men are my most beloved team in comics. My favorite character of literally anything is Pixie, a really obscure character, but she's from the X-Men, and she's my favorite character out of anything. And on top of that, Cyclops is my favorite superhero team leader, and Magneto is not only my favorite supervillain, and has been since I first started liking comics, but it was him, portrayed by Ian McKellen in the first X-Men film, that made me like him. And that's what got me into comics. So, I mean, the X-Men films, aside from that first one, aside from a few examples like the first one, that really got me into comics and got me loving all of the superhero stuff, they've been overall pretty much a disappointment. There's been a few good films, such as, the first one I really enjoy, the second one I actually really like. I know a few people don't like it. Logan is phenomenal. There's a few shining examples, but too often they've failed to really do anything. They don't... For me, they aren't the X-Men that I love. And not on top of that, they're also not really well-made films a lot of the time. Even ones I've enjoyed, like First Class, are not amazingly well-made. And I really wanted Dark Phoenix to at least make up for the mistakes of some of the past films, even if it wasn't going to be an amazing film in itself. Unfortunately, it doesn't, and in some ways it might actually make some of those previous problems a little bit worse. I have no idea where to start with the review of this film, honestly. So, I'm probably going to try and start with more of a positive note, because as you can tell, it's going to be a bit more of a negative review, which does kind of suck. Basically, straight off, this cast is insanely strong, especially for a film like this. It's full of really good actors giving really good performances. They are actually giving their all. For a lot of them. McAvoy is perhaps the best he's been at Xavier yet. Maybe he was better in Days of Future Past, but maybe. Here he's a lot more like Xavier, the Xavier of the comics, where Days of Future Past he was kind of a little bit different still. But he plays this really strongly conflicted man trying to do the best for his people, even if that may not always be the right thing. And it leads to a lot of really strong scenes with Hulk's Beast in this, as they clash over the best way to do these things and whether or not it's right. There's actually a couple of really good scenes between those two from that. Sophie Turner as Jean Grey pulls out a really good performance, becoming conflicted over her growing powers that are completely new to her in a lot of ways. There's just so many good performances that it's so sad to watch them be let down by this script. They're doing their best, and the script is constantly letting them down throughout this film. Problem after problem arises from the writing of this film. The dialogue, no matter how well acted it is in any given scene, is just far too clunky and wanting to tell the audience everything, which is a problem that was worse in X-Men Apocalypse, but it's still present here, and it's not that much better. It's a bit better, it's not a lot. Like, it has a huge problem that a lot of these films seem to have these days of telling, not showing. And it sucks because it's a little bit of a comic book thing. Comic books do that a lot because they're trying to give information of things that aren't fully on panel. Less of a problem now, but it used to be a big thing. But it's weird on screen. It feels clunky to see people going somewhere and then having them say, we're going somewhere. Like, that's just not how this is supposed to work. And there's also major issues in the overall structure of this film, as characters are moved from one set of sequences to another, and the only real thought involved in them doing that is that we need to get them moving on to the next set of sequences. There's definitely a couple of moments where a character will go from one place to another place with no real logical construction of why they went from one place to the other. And Jean's character kind of gets this badly a lot because she suddenly got, like, flight powers, but it's very Superman-y. Like, she can sort of fly anyway, but then they do a lot of really Superman-y flight where she goes, shoo! And they do that basically to get her from one place to the next place to start off the next set of, drama that kicks off the next set of action sequences, essentially. And the problem is, there's no real logical reasoning to do a lot of it, and it kind of hurts the film because of that. Like, it needed a bit of a stronger structure in why it was doing things instead of just being like, we need to get the film further towards the ending. This becomes a far bigger problem as it moves into the third act, which had apparently, and it's probably kind of well known at this point, had been, like, basically entirely rewritten and reshot. And the structure really falls apart here, because basically the third act throws away any thematic or narrative resonance that it could have had for a CGI sequence that doesn't really have the grandeur that it seems to think it does. It basically devolves into that overly CGI final superhero-supervillain fight. But there's nothing really there, it just happens. Like, people had issues with the final fight sequence of Captain Marvel. For me, like, I don't think, I like Captain Marvel, but it's not a perfectly great scene. It could have been done better. Here I feel like it's worse, because it just happens. There's no weight to literally anything that happens there, particularly with how powerful this character is. Like, Captain Marvel's pretty powerful. Phoenix is a lot more powerful, and basically it's just like, yeah, she can just do whatever. The third act also completely pronounces the film's major problems with its villains. Particularly Chastain is the main villain that I do not remember the name of. I know it's actually a character from the comics that was changed from a male to the female for a film. I can't remember what it was for the life of me. I think it's mentioned twice, and it's not overly important to the rest of the film. There's no real spoilers in the fact that the villains are the Dabari. There are basically aliens from a planet that was destroyed by the Phoenix Force. That's never actually called the Phoenix Force in the film, they just refer to it as a cosmic force, and she, Jean Grey, is referred to as Phoenix by the other ex-students because she survives the big space explosion in the trailers. I believe that's totally mentioned in one of the trailers. In the comics, the Dabari were always known as the Asparagus People, who are basically there for, I think, a page, maybe a little bit more, to basically get destroyed by the Phoenix Force. It leads to later things of Jean Grey being accused of cosmic genocide and stuff later on, but, that was kind of what they were for a while. And here, those Asparagus People basically become generic, tall aliens, very generic looking, not very well CGI'd, and they're shapeshifters for no real reason, and it's not really ever dealt with in the film. Like, Skrulls, it's arguable whether or not it really added much, but, like, Skrulls, there was always going to be a part of them in Captain Marvel because that's what they are in the comics. Take that away would have been a major slap in the face. But there's still a part of that is still played into the structure of the film and the way characters act and things like that. Here, they're shapeshifters. They rock up, they turn into people. There's a vague amount of references to them trying to, restart their planet, so they're sort of infiltrating human society. But that doesn't really ever matter, and it doesn't really add anything. They could have just been human-looking people that integrated into society anyway. It doesn't really matter, and especially once their true plan of controlling the Phoenix Force becomes known, all of that becomes even more thrown out the window. They're just oh, we just came here because we were following so there were some here on Earth, but then others were following the Phoenix Force, which happened to come to Earth, because they were looking to control the Phoenix Force and make Earth a new planet, or something. So the shape-shifting thing, narratively, didn't need to happen. They don't have it in the power in the comics, so why did they suddenly decide to give it to them here? And there's a lot of theory about that's why they reshot the third act, was because they were actually going to do the twist of, oh, they're actually not villains, they're refugees, but Captain Marvel did that, so they had to change their final act to get around it. They could have just been, humanoid aliens, and the plot would have worked exactly the same. Basically, they get devolved into basic control the MacGuffin, rule the world type villains that lack any depth or development or general logic at times throughout the film. And then towards the very end, they just become monstrous villains that just throw themselves at machine guns, because why the hell not at this point? It doesn't actually add anything to them. They're just there to die to get the movie going in action sequences. Personally, for me, I would have taken one of at least 3 other paths to make the villains more important and interesting, and I thought of these pretty much immediately after seeing the film. If they were completely sold on they wanted aliens to be the villains, then instead of making the aliens want to rule the world and make a new world, why not make them a cult of the Phoenix Force? And their entire reasoning for going after Jean and trying to encourage her to take on the power is so that she becomes a living embodiment of their god. That gives them a villainous purpose, because they would know the Phoenix Force is destructive, but to them that's a good thing. But they're not out to just destroy things, they're out to bring their god alive. There's actually sort of a noble cause there. I mean, and even then, another option is just simply make the Phoenix Force the antagonist of the film. That its corruption of Jean Grey is the enemy, and it using her to do what it wants. In the comics, I don't know whether they retconned it or not exactly, but there was a whole thing that the Dark Phoenix was actually the Phoenix Force created a new Jean Grey to embody those darker aspects. Well, it locked the real Jean away. They could have done that almost. It would have become a fight the same powers versus the same powers. But they could have found something more interesting to do there, I think. And it would have been more interesting, a little bit like X3 of the X-Men versus Jean, except they still didn't technically do it enough there to get around it here. So they could have just done it. They could have just gone, hell, let's just have the X-Men take down Jean and fight Jean. And then maybe a self-sacrifice, or maybe she regains control and expels the Force, decides to be a human rather than a god. Something along those lines. But for me, the best one they could have done, especially because this was, even if it wasn't going to be the final film necessarily when they wrote it, it tries to play itself into the history of the X-Men films, even if it's only ever through vague references to First Class, really. It doesn't mention much of anything else that ever happened. But bring back the Hellfire Club. The Hellfire Club is not a singular being that can be destroyed. It's an organization that can be rebuilt. You could even leave it as a vague thing, right up until the end, and then suddenly have it revealed it was actually the Hellfire Club the whole time, and then it's a real bring back in. And they could use some other members of the Hellfire Club we haven't actually seen before, like Selene, and the one that I think would have been really good to use here, like in the comics, of Mastermind. In the comics, part of the reason she becomes Dark Phoenix is because of Mastermind's manipulations of her. They could have done something very similar here. I have a little bit of a thing for, like, a bias towards that because Mastermind is Pixie's father, but still, it's a really interesting thing that they could have done some really cool stuff, and using the Hellfire Club would have instantly given the villain some sort of fleshing out and characterization, rather like just straight off the bat, because we know they're coming off of something we already knew. Instead, they're generic, and their finale has no real weight or meaning, and it just ends up being a real waste in the end. Basically, Dark Phoenix could have been something special. But instead, I have to say that at least they seem to learn some lessons from Last Stand, though not all. I was really pleased to see Cyclops was done better than he's pretty much been done in any other film so far. He's not perfect, and well, at least in terms of how close he is to his character and how he should be done, but it's certainly an improvement. Dark Phoenix gets 3 out of 5 stars from me, though part of me is still hoping New Mutants can be good. It really sucks because I wanted this movie to be good. I know people really enjoyed this film. I've seen a few people that I know really enjoyed this film. But, I mean, and it's one of those things. You can totally enjoy a film, but that doesn't make it a good film. This film has too many issues that are not remedied at any point to, unfortunately, make it what it should have been. Maybe it needed multiple films to build this idea up, instead of basically what they did, like they did what they did the last time, where they have a vague reference that jumps into then the next film is Dark Phoenix. They totally could have done something more, but they just never quite get there. And it just really sucks. This is their last outing with it, so now we have to hope that Marvel Studios and the MCU can do something more with this franchise. But anyway, guys, let me know what you think in the comments below. I'm definitely sure there'll be a few people that disagree with me on this one, because I've seen a few people, like I said, I've seen a few people that liked it, so I think there'll be some people that disagree, but I'll be interested to see what your thoughts are, and if you can kind of give me a reasoning why, if there's something I had found as an issue that you didn't, why you didn't find it as an issue. Because I'd be interested to see, especially like the villain stuff. Like, I found them very uninspired, but maybe you saw something in them that I didn't. And that'd be actually really cool to know. If you liked the video, you can hit the like button. If you didn't like it, there's a dislike button. And if you're new to the channel and you like movie reviews and trailer reactions and video game plays and stuff, I got some scary game stuff coming up soon with Chris had a chance to do some more videos. He's been busy with family stuff, so it's hard for him to do videos anymore, at least for as frequently. But we managed to get some stuff done together, so that's really cool. I'm working on getting that out, and we also did some little interesting couple of videos that I think are kind of fun. So they'll be coming out soon too. So if you're into all that stuff, make sure you hit the subscribe button to keep up on all the soft jubiness, because we're delicious, not malicious, is the slogan that only gets used every so often. But anyway, guys, thanks for watching, and I will see you in the next video.
What's that?
It's a book of scary stories.
I don't know what I would do if I found a book of scary stories on a supposedly haunted house. Huh.
Hey, what's going on?
Tommy's